Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to the Brit workshop. You may recall probably over a year ago I made a little video which included this Vise made by Bessey. I was given the original one and I couldn't quite see how I could integrate it into my sort of workshop concept, and in particular into the usage with the MFT3, and so I gave it away to a good friend of mine who then was a woodworking apprentice. He's now finished his apprenticeship, but he's still got the Vise. Anyway, so at the recent D&M show, I managed to acquire another one of these. So I'm now going to show you how you can integrate this Vise from Bessey into your benchtop, whether it's an MFT3 or something similar. Now, my eureka moment came when I looked more closely at how this Vise is made. And you will notice that it's made of probably 4 main pieces of plastic, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. And the top and bottom ones are fixed together with some screws. So I thought, what happens if I remove 4 of the screws so I expose this element here? So there are those 4 screws, and when I try and remove this top, it won't come off. And the reason for that is that these rods are passing all the way through. So in order to disassemble it, you actually have to remove this screw, which takes with it the rods there. And there's that element taken away, and I'm now left with this piece. Now, a while ago, I had discovered that an 8mm bar would go nicely through these additional holes. And these holes are designed so that the clamps can fit in to secure it to a bench top. Well, in the case of my MFT3, that's not quite so simple. And so what I've done is I've cut 2 pieces of this 8mm bar, and they're like this. My holes aren't absolutely spot on in the centre, but it doesn't really matter because they shouldn't really show. And they're just a little bit longer than the requirement so that they go all the way through. They can be flush at the front here, which is the part of the face of the Vise, and there's a hole which will be internal, and there's an additional hole which would be at the back, and that allows this to be screwed down, and by using a bar like this it spreads the load. Now when you take this apart like so, do remember how this piece fits. It fits such that this face, which goes against there, is sub-flush. In other words, it's not going to stick out from this surface here. And the idea is that my holders effectively act as giant load spreaders, so that if one screws them in through here, admittedly you've got to drill a hole in this plastic, and at the back, that then could secure this element of the Vise onto a bench top. And by the time it's reconstructed, you then have your Vise held firmly on the bench top. Now the disadvantage of this is, of course, you've put this back on here and you've screwed it all up. If you wanted to remove the Vise, well, you can't get at the screws which are under there. So I developed the idea a little further, and my idea is that you would have a little platform for it to fit onto, which goes onto the side of the MFT3. Now, a while ago I made some nameplates for a couple of friends of mine who do demonstrations for Festool, and their demonstrations are almost entirely done on an MFT3, and so the nameplate slid in along this section of the MFT3. And in order to make that possible, I made up some little gadgets which fit into the extrusion which is here, and some funny shaped bits that go in from the end as well, like so. And my idea is that I would have those sort of gadgets fixed onto this holder, and you would slide it onto the extrusion at the front of the MFT3. And there might then be just one additional screw at the back here, which holds the whole thing more firmly in place. And that, I think, would be a pretty good solution. So my Vise parts would be mounted on here. There's one other consideration, and that is one might want to hold long pieces of wood in the Vise, and so therefore this rear face of the Vise, which is here, the main part of the Vise is over this way, needs to be flush or even forward of this surface here. I'm going to start by making up this piece here. Now this piece of wood is about 71 or 72 millimeters long that way. This piece, I haven't actually measured it, I just cut it, is 135, and the width here is just over 106 millimeters. So all fairly easy to find pieces of wood. I'm now just going to put a bit of glue along here and I will screw this up. I've got 3 screw holes already in that top. Now if you wanted to make this just a little bit more fancy, rather than doing a butt joint like this, you might consider using a dovetail joint, and that would be rather nice. And it would be rather nice to use contrasting bits of wood, and it would look rather special. Now at this stage you've really got to make sure that this comes together square. Now I'm using the face of this extrusion and the flat top of the table really to ensure that. After all, it is designed to fit onto this top eventually. Now I'm going to line this up. When I'm happy it's lined up, I'm then going to put a clamp on there and then start drilling. I'm happy with that, so I'll now just do a pilot drill here. And I'll then just put in, that's it, and repeat the process on this side. And that's absolutely super, that's fine. So I have my basic part of the fixing block, but I want to add to it the pieces that fit into the extrusion. Now the 2 key ones are these. Now this V shape is a perfect right angle there, and you can cut that in a number of different ways. And the way I did this was I put a chamfer cutter, 45-degree chamfer cutter, in my router table, and I then did 2 passes, one that way and one that way, and that ended up with that 90-degree shape. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but that's pretty good. And then this one, again, it was done on the router table, and you do need to just measure up yourself so that this then will fit the channel that one would normally use with one of these Festool clamps. And so it's not terribly complicated. What is a little tricky now is getting these pieces joined onto this. Now in order for this piece to match, you do need a spacing piece which I've cut, and again you must measure these yourself because it will depend on the thickness of your MFT3 top. I make my own, so they may be slightly different from the standard top, and so that's something that you need to do, and it's good experience. So the first thing is I've got to put this in place in here, just to remind myself that's going in like so, and that's going on like so. Introduce the 2 together, give it a little wiggle, and now I'm just going to clamp that up so it stays firmly in place. Well, that's that clamped up. It looks a little bit elaborate, but I think that will do the job. I'm just going to drill the hole through the plastic that the screw will go through. Now I'm making sure that this is the face, this is the inner face here of the vise, and I'm just making sure that this is flush. Just remember, if like me you've made these so that the 2 metal pieces are slightly different, you've got to make sure they stay in their respective holes, otherwise they won't quite fit the holes you've just drilled. Then now comes the complicated bit of somehow trying to get this piece, which fits in this channel here, glued on in the correct place. And similarly, this piece, which is the V section, glued on in the right place. If you've got these to the right dimensions, then that piece, when it fits in there, should just touch the piece that we've just glued in here. Now with this piece, the way I've done this is that it's actually slightly loose in the hole, in that it wants to come forward. So what I've got is a packing piece of paper which I'm going to put in from behind, and now pulls this face forward so that that is just slightly proud of the surface of the extrusion. So now all I've got to do is put some glue on those. Now this is one of those times when you really mustn't have too much glue. Right, so there we are. I'm now just going to position this on here. So I'm pretty sure that that is going to be okay. I've got everything in contact, there's glue there, and we'll just have to wait and see. Now I've put this piece of wood on the front here, and I've clamped it in place to give me something hard to press the bottom part of the vise against. Now, I've actually put a piece of thin cardboard between the end of this piece and this piece, so that that allows this part of the vise to go forward by probably about a quarter of a millimetre, maybe a third of a millimetre. So that means that anything held in this vise is definitely going to clear my piece of wood that's there. So I'm now ready to put this in position. I'm just using my judgment to get it in the centre. That's in position. Now the screws that are going to go through these rear elements need some packing underneath, otherwise it's going to distort everything. So I've got a couple of washers which I'm pretty sure are going to be about the right diameter. Well, I'm very pleased with the fit of this. It's a very nice tight fit. I can now reassemble the vise, and all I need to do is make sure that this piece is in the correct orientation. It is. I'm then going to just place that part on there, and there are 4 screws which I'll now reinstate. And one then just simply reintroduces this part to complete the assembly. That's it in place. Now, this is reasonably secure, although to be honest, I would be happier if there were now a pair of screws going through here. And what one can do is to position one's vise wherever you want it, then screw a couple of screws into the MDF of your MFT top. I don't think that's a problem at all. It might just be one screw which will be required. The alternative might be to have a special dog hole, so you put a dog through, but the problem with that is as you move it from one MFT3 or to another type of bench, then it may not work so well. Now I'm sure you remember the Cis MFT, which I've got one here, and I think it would be really useful to use this with the Cis MFT. And it can be done quite simply. It doesn't need to fit in any channel here. That can just butt up there. And as long as there are now 2 screws holding this into the MDF top, then there's no problem. And you can position it where it suits you, really. Obviously, one would like to be able to open this whilst it's fitted. And so having it at the side, either to the left or to the right, would be a better idea. Now this is a position where you might consider doing something with a dog hole. For example, you could have a screw insert in this piece and something coming up through the dog hole here to hold it in place. So there we go. There's a very simple vise arrangement that you can have to fit on your MFT3 or any other bench, as I've just demonstrated with the Cis MFT. You can use this in all sorts of situations very easily. Not bad, is it really? Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.